Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be, from your background, are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. On Thursday, it's 10:30 Eastern Time, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod. If you haven't already, smash a thumbs up and follow the channel. Subscribe if you want to do that, but definitely subscribe to the audio format. Even if you're watching us here on Rumble, just roll on over to iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, any of those platforms. Subscribe there. You get the automatic downloads, help us to grow on the audio, and share it with a friend. If we double up today on Rumble, guys, we'll get to over 10,000 followers, which might get us a dozen or two more views in the show. And that's ultimately what we want to do. We want to radicalize more people, especially today, because today we're talking about temporary insanity and sort of a play. I'm being coy with the words of the title of the show because we are seeing some common sense things come about sometimes, which would imply that other times there is no common sense, which would mean that you're temporarily insane. Temporarily insane, like being heavily involved in Ukraine. The New York Times, yes, which was once a newspaper. The New York Times reports about how the United States was very, very involved in what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. The FBI is partnering with PETA, which is the motivation behind today's thumbnail of a chimpanzee. Lots to talk about there. Communists are still running around the IRS. And Big Ag is asking for blanket immunity for all of the poison they're putting in your food. We got that. We got a whole bunch more. We're going to get to it all. But first, let's thank today's sponsor, which is the OG sponsor of the American Radicals Podcast. That's a True Earth Pharmacy. Go to trueearth.co, trueearth.co, and you can go to their pharmacy, spelled with an F, or you can go and look at their fertilizer options there. The fertilizers are good. Here's we here on the springtime planting season. Definitely check out the new squid extract. If you want to look at the pharmacy, the options there. I'm a big proponent of the black turmeric and the turmeric trio. If you get some inflammation issues, maybe you got heavy ankle pain like I do from all the miles I'm running. And yes, I do run miles. That doesn't mean that I'm running for office. Apparently, that was a big social media thing. People thought that I was being coy again and indicating that I have some political ambitions when I shared a Forrest Gump gif. But if you go to trueearth.co, use promo code AMRAD25, AMRAD25 to get you 10% off everything store-wide there. All right, without further ado, let's get to the temporary insanity with probably the most sane individual who I know. Garrett O'Boyle at GOB Actual is the name. I'm sorry the election didn't quite go your way in Wisconsin for the Supreme Court, but there was some temporary sanity, as it seems like almost 7 in 10 voters like you to have an ID when you go to vote, right?
Yeah, what's crazy about that is I was looking at the comparison between the presidential election and this most recent one, and as many just about turned out for both, which I have a hard time believing that, Steve. So maybe I'm not as sane as you propose, because when we went to vote, and I know it's a very tight window and a very anecdotal example, but when we went to vote for the presidential election, we waited in line for like 45 minutes. This time in and out, like typical for these, off-season elections. And then when the results come pouring in, it's like, really? A couple million people turned out to vote for this special election? I have a hard time believing that. And maybe it's my own biases, Steve. I don't know, but or maybe it's because I knew Brad Schimmel in the past, and he was also the attorney general here at one time. And the ideas of the woman who won, Susan Crawford, she's as insane as they come and is anti-voter ID. Yet the voter ID measure passed in flying colors. So I don't know, man. Call me a conspiracy theorist. Give me a tinfoil hat, because I'm not holding my breath on the integrity of anything anymore.
All right, let's get to the topic at hand, and I want to start over at the IRS, which I think has done a pretty good job as far as its PR goes, as they put Ziegler and who's the other whistleblower there?
Shapley.
Gary Shapley, into positions of leadership now, looking at what's going on. So they're definitely cleaning up their image. But I remember all the way back during the Lois Lerner days, which is the story and the subject of today's temporary insanity. But as a refresher for those who might not recall, this is a media report from Brian Williams, very serious guy who was getting shot at when he was deployed overseas, apparently as a Navy SEAL, talking about the IRS scandal.
The IRS has now just come to new life in a graphic way. Emails were released today by a House committee investigating former IRS official Lois Lerner, who is accused of targeting the Tea Party and other conservative political groups for special scrutiny. The emails attributed to her may say a lot about political motivations. We get that story tonight from NBC's Kelly O'Donnell.
Tonight, a new email drama involving this former senior IRS official, and some salty language. Lois Lerner has long refused to cooperate with Congress.
I respectfully exercise my Fifth Amendment right and decline to answer that question.
But her harsh words, apparently aimed at conservative talk radio, contained in just released IRS emails, are drawing new fire. Lerner referred to some as crazies. She wrote in November 2012, "So we don't need to worry about alien terrorists. It's our own crazies that will take us down."
Oh, she's just a public servant there, Garrett.
Of course.
She'd been a lifetime, a career public servant who just were owed a great debt of gratitude. Maybe she was the fall guy in that situation. I think she was removed from office or from a position she held at the IRS. But if you remember the narrative, it was that there were a couple of rogue, low-level employees in Cincinnati, Ohio, who were holding up the 501c3 approvals of these organizations because they saw the name Tea Party or Patriot in their title and immediately assumed that they were conservative, which is great because one of the best things is if there's an American flag waving in someone's house is that they're going to be right of center political leaning. I mean, that's how bad and open and naked the communists are in the country. But the reason I'm bringing that blast from the past back is that there is a report that comes from the Daily Caller about not Lois Lerner, but one of her top subordinates. So this IRS official involved in the Obama-era Tea Party scandal, she's quietly running a key tax division. She was reappointed. Her name is Holly Paz, P-A-Z, former IRS Commissioner Lois Lerner's top deputy at the agency. And Paz was the top deputy at the time of the IRS until she was replaced in 2013 during all of this fallout. But she was rejoined the agency during the Biden administration, and she still has a job. Now, I mean, look, she could have just been following orders, right? I mean, you never know until you actually do what Steve Friend does, and that's his research. And you go and find an article from the Seattle Times from June 16th, 2013. Holly Paz was recently a top deputy in the division that handles applications for tax-exempt status, told congressional investigators she reviewed 20 to 30 applications. Her assertion contradicts initial agency claims that a small group of agents working on an office in Cincinnati were solely responsible for mishandling the applications. Paz said dozens of Tea Party applications sat untouched for more than a year while field agents waited for guidance from Washington. It's almost like the January 6 cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
Paz told investigators that Tea Party was a catch-all phrase for political organizations seeking tax-exempt status, not unlike Kleenex. However, several employees in Cincinnati told investigators that applications for left-wing groups seeking tech-exempt status were not scrutinized excessively. So they just got the rubber stamp from them at the IRS. Now, this woman is still in power, still in charge, because she was reappointed during the Biden administration, and just one of many. This is not just like this is the kingpin. This isn't the wizard behind the curtain, but I think it just lends to the continued theory that we've hammered on, that a change at the top is not going to fix this. Top to bottom, there are just so much subterfuge. There are so many communists who have just entrenched themselves in the bureaucracy.
Yeah, 100%. It wasn't that this figure sticks with me that we talked about earlier this year, just in the Washington, D.C. area, of how 80-90% of bureaucrats, so just about, for all intents and purposes, all of your bureaucrats at headquarters in the IRS and the FBI and the ATF and the DEA and Homeland, and you name the agency, they are politically captured when they're supposed to be as unbiased as possible. And this 12-year-old example is should ring true. You should see the common thread. The quote unquote deep state has been deep for a very long time, and they've been trying to oppose anything that they don't believe in for even longer, because they are, like I said, captured. They don't believe in freedom. They don't believe in you can have logical arguments and disagreements with one another and still move forward in a positive way as a nation, even with our disagreements. That used to be what most Americans would point to and say was one of the things that made America so great, is we can have our disagreements and we can show up at the polls, even if you're a government employee, you can still go vote. And once you go to work, you set that aside and you just do your job. You try to remove your bias as much as possible, and then you get an example like this where you're getting rubber stamps on one side and completely walled off on the other.
You're not only kidding yourself, you are actually bordering on insanity if you think you can share a government and share a country with the communists. That they'll just return to a semblance of and a modicum of this understanding that we can coexist. Like the coexist bumper sticker is not real. Okay. That is just them playing on your emotions, using that to their advantage. And when they're not in power, they will use your tendencies in which you aspire to. You aspire to live in a civil society where people can disagree and still get along. And they will play on that because it's to their advantage. And then when they get into power, as we saw with Lois Lerner, who was in the IRS, and that was going on during the Obama administration, boot to throat. And it just keeps getting elevated up higher and higher. And unless there's some sort of mutually assured destruction here, at the very least, you lose your job and not get to retain that employership, that employment during times when you're not in power, then we can't ever expect the social compact to hold, or expect the cold Civil War to remain cold and not go kinetic. Um, Let's go over though to another. This is temporary sanity, and then it indicates to me how academia has completely let go of the rope. And I threw this at you before we went live, Garrett, and you said you love this story. So we got to cover down on this guy who's a very Doge. I don't know if he's officially or not, but he's certainly got that spirit. He said he used AI to email 3,800 Ivy League bureaucrats, and now my school is investigating me. So around 2 a.m. on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday, I launched a public database mapping all 3,805 non-faculty employees of Brown University and sent them each a simple email, quote, "What do you do all day?" I work from the common room in my dorm's basement, the same room that floods whenever it rains and thus has plastic tarps, industrial fans, and wet floor signs. And this kid pays $93,000 a year to go to this institute.
Dude, it's insane.
Their financial woes at Brown, an Ivy League college, um, mean that the school runs a $46 million budget deficit. So they're hitting people up for donations, I'm sure, while professors constantly complain they're underpaid. So where does our $93,000 a year actually go? So he sets up this site called Bloat at Brown. used retrieval augmented generation and custom GPT-4o pipeline. I mean, he just was using artificial intelligence basically to rank administrators by their operational importance into 3 categories. Okay? The 3 types were DEI jobs, redundant jobs, and bullshit jobs. Guys, bro. I expected some level of engagement, but only 20 people got back, one of whom replied with a simple F you, and another of whom suggested I stick an entire cactus up my ass. This is all on the school websites, by the way. I mean,
Yeah.
this is all going to be retained. Immediately after the business day started, Brown sent a memo to employees ordering them not to respond. This is like Elon Musk's "What do you do all day?" 5 bullet points, and they told people not to respond. Someone leaked my social security number. Only those in the registrar's office should have access to it, so it came from the inside.
Hmm.
Someone else from a Brown IP address hacked the site, and there was a coordinated effort to flood my inbox with every porn newsletter on the internet.
Jeez.
Less than 48 hours later, an associate dean informed me I was under review for, quote, emotional, psychological harm, misrepresentation, invasion of privacy, and violation of operational rules. He just used publicly available information.
Mhm.
There was no
Dude,
privacy invasion.
the backlash that he's facing is our definition of tyranny, Steve. Arbitrary use of authority, despotic abuse of power. How, so they're accusing him of what they are doing to him now. Releasing his social security number, that's a Privacy Act issue. So where's the person in the registrars? Why aren't they hunting down that person who's doing that type of thing? And then flooding his box with porn bots and newsletters, and or the administrators who's emailing back saying "F you" or "shove it up your ass." How you're not going to say that that's not emotional harm? Give me a break. And also this guy, what are you doing spending $400,000 at Brown for to get yourself through the 4 years? Maybe you got to take 5 years and now it's going to be 500,000. You don't need it. Clearly, you
Clearly, he's competent and he's got some cyber chops. And I also throw this into the camp of you're funding your own demise when you
Mhm.
throw out that figure. I mean, the guy's dropping close to $500,000 towards his education so that the university can turn around and activate and come out against him because he asked a reasonable question like,
Right.
why? What are you doing? I'm the customer
Mhm.
here.
Right.
I'm in charge. I'm the citizen. The same thing as the government turning on the people. And all they did was activate the stream communists to
Mhm.
flood his inbox with porn bots, and then the bureaucrats at the university acting, analogously to a government actor. Now we have our man. We're going to find a crime.
Mhm.
They're going to punish him for having asked these questions and embarrassed them. And this guy is going on the offensive. I mean, this is he put this out on a Substack or to some regard. I mean, he's not remaining private. He's countering the narrative the university is putting out here. So it will be interesting to see if Brown is getting some federal funding, if maybe there's some strings attached to that. But to me, it shows how academia is completely devoid of any
Oh
reason
yeah.
or common sense.
Yeah, 100%. This is that same entitled behavior that we talk about all the time, typically in regard to government. Of course, academia has been captured in this way for just as long, and it's that pride and that hubris that we talk about all the time. And really, at least for me, when I think about it, part of it's probably because I've been going through the history of some of these communist states that even just as recently as the late 80s, and it's the same thread, man. It's the exact same thread when you get these people in these positions and they think they are entitled to it and they think that they can do no wrong. And how dare you question me and my authority and my position? How dare you? Now I'm going to come and destroy you because you're my enemy. And it's like you said, it's a reasonable question. He's looking at what he's spending every year, multiplying that by however many thousands of students go there, and then to see the deficit, and then to see all the employees, and he's like, they actually don't seem like they do a whole lot. I'm just going to ask, what do you do? And very few out 3,800 employees, 20 responded, and most of them were vitriolic in nature. And he's the bad guy. That should tell you everything you need to know, regardless of what side of the political aisle you stand on, because this isn't political. He didn't say anything political in nature. He just asked them what they do. But a good communist is going to say, it doesn't matter what I do, peasant. You go and get in your bread line while I go and eat at the dictator's feet.
Do you think there was possibly I don't know, maybe a low-level person in the Cincinnati office of the Brown registrar who leaked his information online, or maybe there was some coordination from some very high-ranking executive.
Oh, for sure. Always the coordination. None of this stuff is coincidental. It always trickles down from the top. And I'm sure they had one of these meetings. Hey, don't put this in an email. Don't text this, not even on Signal, because we don't want to have our own Brown Signal gate. So we're going to just talk about it and then we're going to go and execute it. Of course, that's what good communists do. They don't put it on paper.
All right. I want to talk about Ukraine. We've talked about this on and off for now. I mean, this is 3 years this has been going on. And the New York Times apparently caught wind of the fact that we weren't just waving the blue and gold flags in the wells of Congress and sending
Oh, you
off
think?
the treasure of you and your progeny, Garrett. We might have been a little bit more involved in that. In a deep, long expose, the New York Times, which was at one time a newspaper, talked about the partnership, the secret history of the war in Ukraine.
Okay, even right off the bat, Steve, if you have a couple brain cells,
It's not secret.
right? This is what America does. This is what we have been doing for decades. There's nothing secret about this. But if you came out in the beginning and said, "Oh, I bet you there's some Delta Force SEAL Team 6 CIA ops going on there," you'd have been laughed at or called a conspiracy theorist, even though this is what we always do. Or like what's his name? Abu Ghraib guy, My Lai massacre, Nord Stream 2. I forget his name. I wrote a freaking Substack about the guy. Oh, you're muted. Um, uh, what's his name?
He wrote about the pipeline. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll think about it in a second.
I'm very disappointed in myself here because I seriously wrote a Substack about this guy a while
Mm.
back. But anyways, he was called he's a Nobel Prize winning journalist, and he's a conspiracy theorist now. There's nothing secret going on here. This is what America does.
So the expose that came from the New York Times here, it's Seymour Hersh, right?
Yeah,
By the
there it
way,
is.
as I was
Yep.
looking off screen. Yeah. All right. The partnership, the secret history of the war in Ukraine. You are insane if you don't think we're involved. But I mean, like my jokes is always like, hey, we're sending them weapons. Do you think we're sending the instruction manuals in Ukrainian, or are we sending personnel over there helping them? It was way more than that. The New York Times was able to finally get this out 3 years after the fact, where we're probably in the latter stages of this conflict going on, hopefully. So within 2 months of the initial Putin sending his army across the border, Ukrainian generals in civilian clothes were secretly whisked away to high-level war planning sessions at US bases in Germany, which would explain the map there for those watching. So in 2022, Ukrainians unleashed a rocket barrage at a headquarters for the Russian 58th Combined Arms Army, killing generals and staff officers inside. Again and again, the group set up another location. Each time, the Americans found it and the Ukrainians destroyed it. So again, we have some level of plausible deniability. Like we're not pushing the button. We're doing the fishing guide thing where they, fly fish for you and they send it out and they actually get a fish to bite on it. And then they start pulling it and then they hand you at the last
Yeah,
second
here you
the
go.
reel and say, look at the fish you caught, right?
Yeah.
And they give a couple of big examples. The two biggest ones, though, that I wanted to highlight that I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So at the height of Ukraine's counteroffensive in 2022, they've done multiple counteroffensives. A pre-dawn swarm of maritime drones with support from the CIA attacked a Crimean port, damaging several warships and prompting the Russians to begin pulling them back. So the CIA now involved, not just DOD. And then this one was the coup de grace. Every morning, officers were called. Ukrainians and Americans gathered to survey Russian weapons systems and ground forces and determine the ripest, highest value targets. Inside the U.S. European Command, the process gave rise to a fine but fraught linguistic debate. Language matters, after all, right, Garrett?
How about that?
Given the delicacy of the mission, was it unduly provocative, as they call it, to call targets targets? The debate was settled by Major General Timothy Brown, European Command Intelligence Chief. The locations of the Russian forces would be called points of interest, not targets. Intelligence on airborne threats would be tracks of interest. If you ever get asked the question, did you pass a target to the Ukrainians, you can legitimately not be lying when you say, no, I did not.
Yeah, because we'll just change the definition of things to make it seem like we aren't involved in this war. People talk about how evil Vladimir Putin is and how he's the aggressor and yada, yada, yada. And we've mentioned it in the past, I believe, that this goes back way deeper than most people in the West truly understand, just historically with those regions before they were Russia, before they were Ukraine, and all the things that tie into that. Vladimir Putin has long held the belief, like many in Russia, that Ukraine is historically part of the motherland, and so he's trying to make Russia great again, really. But if you think about what our involvement here, and the money aside, and now this quote unquote secret wars coming out of the New York Times, when you peel the onion layers back a little bit, what should really strike you is his restraint, because this is enough for a country, a sovereign country, to say, okay, that's it. We know you're involved. We're because we have our own intelligence services that are gathering intel and finding quote unquote points of interest, and that's it. We're done. The gloves are coming off. We're not just going to deal with Ukraine anymore, and that could lead to, well, probably not even being hyperbolic, World War III, because just start carpet bombing civilian locations, cities, maybe even some of the American bases that are nearby. And I think from a just war theory perspective, he'd be justified in doing that. But no, America's the good guys. Wave your yellow and blue flag, or yeah, your yellow and blue flag, and keep giving them money, and go ahead and send our spies and special ops guys over there too to help out. Why not?
It's not even a conversation about the merits of one side or another, like who's the black hat, who's the white hat. The fact is, it didn't involve us at all. It
Mhm.
didn't have to involve us at all. And they looked us in the eye and said, "We're not doing that." We all said, Are we taking crazy pills? Because we know that you're doing it."
Mhm.
Right. And how long? 3 years? The New York Times and their ilk just waved pom poms and labeled the Ukrainians as being more American than Ukrainians. Right. And at the same time, they knew this was going on
Right.
because they have more than two brain cells to rub together. And it was never just the finances, and that was certainly a part of it. I mean, there's a huge laundering scheme that goes on in Ukraine, and it's also an element of the military-industrial complex. You had Mitch McConnell saying, like, "This is fantastic." Lindsey Graham's continued to, Lindsey Graham finally found the man that he wants in his life, and it's a 5'5" pudgy guy who likes to play the piano with his penis, because you're fighting this war and no Americans are involved in it. Yeah, we were, and then
Mhm.
they played the language game, right? They're not retaliating against you, Garrett, for your whistleblowing. They just have legitimate concerns about your security clearance,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly right. Yes. Yes. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same pieces on the chessboard where, oh no, we're not coming after you for that. We
Mhm.
didn't. We're not targeting you because you're Russian. You're just a point of interest. You're not a threat. Oh, we're not targeting you for your whistleblowing. That's not at all why we're here.
This
It's
is President Lisa Simpson saying it's not a tax site, it's a temporary refund adjustment. Okay. All right. But we'll go teeter back onto common sense. And I know this one you've talked about a lot, and I'm in full support of. And again, from the New York Times, at one point, a newspaper, maybe occasional scattered showers of journalism. This is reporting on the DoD and Secretary of Defense Hegseth. The Pentagon eliminates lower fitness standards for women in combat roles. Finally, a semblance of common sense. The order by Hegseth mandated that all physical fitness requirements for combat arms positions, which the New York Times makes sure you know that combat arms means units likely to see significant fighting, that the fitness standards have to be sex neutral, which is likely to significantly reduce the number of women who meet the requirements. Oh no. After years of internal deliberations over new annual fitness tests, the Army eased the grading standards. So not enough women were making it, so they just reduced the standards back in
uh-huh.
2022. And in an early limited rollout of the Army's new fitness test, 65% of small set of women failed. So 2 out of 3 women failed the new standards, and 1 in 10 men failed the standards. So this is, I mean, I guess it's like any port in a storm. I think I've said before, I don't want to speak for you. I do not want women in any combat roles.
No.
But if we just maybe make the standards and say, hey, you just got to make the standards. You either got to be an Olympic decathlete / professional UFC fighter and strongman competitor in order to make the unit, which I think the Venn diagram, Kamala Harris style, that overlaps with that will probably be somebody who was making a lot of money as a professional athlete rather than joining the army. That will probably self-select them out of the process. So maybe they're being creative with it as opposed to just blanket statement of here's the standards, and one of them is you have to have a tallywhacker.
Yeah. Thinking of along the lines of a professional athlete, think of like a CrossFit person like Katrin David's daughter or somebody like that. Guarantee you, physically speaking, she would dominate any of the categories against me, even. And that's fine. That's her job. You shouldn't be going into the infantry. And I know recently I told my story about when we had this intelligence, the signals intelligence woman come out on us, who had been bragging and mocking about how she could do everything just like we could, and then she's crying, legitimately crying, while we're out on patrol. And I think of my body even today, after I've been out for almost 13 years now, and my body is still, it's never going to be the same. And a lot of that is because of what happened just doing normal infantry guy things. And notice I said they're infantry guy. Throughout history, it has always been an infantryman. And now it's, oh, well, just let the women in because equality. No, we're not equal physically. Okay. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand this type of thing. Our bone structure, our muscle mass, the way God made us, according to his intelligent design, was intentional. It wasn't only intelligent, it was intentional. And that's because women are how the human race continues. And yeah, man, when I just think of even like the PT test aspect of it, when I was in, it was a 2-mile run, push-ups and sit-ups, and the standards were different. If you were a man, they were different than if you were a woman. Now, I don't know. I think there's like 7 or 8 different events. There's like a 300-meter sprint, a deadlift, and like throwing like a medicine ball and some other stuff. And in a way, it's like, okay, yeah, that overall fitness matters, especially for what soldiers do. And just naturally, because we are different, means that men and women are going to perform differently. Are there going to be some of those women who can do as much or more than men? Sure. Does that mean they should be in combat arms roles? I would say still that it does not.
I think there's societal norms, and there's also just the way that we have the default settings. Well, you could give a million examples. My favorite is like the space program, like when they were canvassing for volunteers to go into space. They weren't asking the women. One, because women are more valuable than men, but two, I don't think there are very many women who are willing to go through the rigors of that training program. And at the end of it, be like, "Yep, strap me on that missile." Where
Hmm.
guys would be like, I'm gonna, I can have a gold star that I can put on my uniform because that would be dope, right? Because
Hmm.
deep down we're all 8-year-olds.
Yep.
All right, we haven't done this in a while, as far as like pointing out some absurdity of like FBI cases. I've been keeping track of a few, and maybe we'll have to do a full episode in the coming weeks or months when we have the opportunity. But I could not bypass the opportunity to bring this up on a temporary insanity episode here on the American Radicals podcast. So I saw this story, and it involves a chimpanzee and PETA and the FBI. So I bring it to you folks just because it's great eating. Reporting from the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Missouri, this is the FBI St. Louis office. Tanya Haydix admits to lying repeatedly to court about the death of Tonka, the chimpanzee. This is an actual FBI case. There were resources, personnel, and time devoted to this. And when I say time, I mean in the area of 10 years. Okay. There was a lawsuit originally filed in 2016, involved allegations from PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, over the care of primates, including Tonka at a facility near Festus, Missouri. Now, on October 2nd, 2020, so you have to flash forward a number of years, District Court entered a consent decree requiring that this woman, whose name is Tanya Hadix, who was then operating the Festus facility, take certain steps relative to Tonka. This is the chimpanzee. Well, followed based on Hadix's failure to comply with the provisions of the court consent decree were a series of motions. So they were just going back and forth in court with PETA saying that you're not taking good enough care of the chimpanzee, and Hadix saying, yes, I am. Back and forth, back and forth. But finally, things came to a head in July of 2021. So now we're talking about almost 4 years, 3.5 years ago that this really, the criminality began. The district court found that Hadix, running the monkey complex, in violation, and entered an additional order requiring that Tonka and 6 other chimps be transferred from her possession to a center for great apes. During the hearing, Hadix falsely claimed that Tonka had died, but failed to provide the court with a proof of death. She should have gotten the proof of death certificate that Tonka had been dead. So a month later, PETA filed another motion seeking civil contempt against Hadix for failing to transfer Tonka. And that's when it came out that she claimed that on May 30th, Tonka died. At the same time, my husband cremated the body, so we can't present the body. After the cremation, he gave me Tonka's remains. And it was all a lie. Tonka was, for those animal lovers out there, Tonka was not dead. Tonka was alive. And that means that Tanya Hadix committed perjury. So a year later, based on newly discovered evidence presented in the court, Tonka was alive. District Court entered its temporary restraining order requiring Tanya Hadix to cooperate with the transfer. And then she's now under arrest for having committed perjury about the chimpanzee. What squad in the FBI was investigating this matter? I don't know. But just this case was open for, I mean, if they go back to 2016, I mean, you're talking about 10 fiscal years, but I mean, maybe it was civil. So at the very least, you're going back to 2020 that this was an FBI investigation, or at least involving the Department of Justice.
I find myself just thinking, why? Why are we putting so much effort into this? It's mind-boggling, Steve. I really don't get it. I really don't. And also, this may be an interesting fun fact for people out there. The PETA types, the I don't know what animal rights activists,
Hippies.
the hippies, the FBI will investigate them on occasion as terrorists because I don't know, but there's and I don't know what the threat banding is for it. I don't really remember, but I remember learning this information that whether it is agricultural or animal rights activists, the FBI may go after them as potential terrorists because of reasons. And I just remember thinking as an FBI agent when I learned this information, like, really, we're going to target people who care more about the chimpanzee than they do humans? We're going to target them as terrorists. Okay, I guess. Which just should go to show that the FBI is a hammer and you're a nail, and they're going to come after you no matter what. Even if you're, I don't know if I would call Miss Hadix anti-animal rights, but she's something, and I don't know what this obsession with Tonka was and her failure to comply, but now she's perjured herself, I guess. And I don't know. I'm at a loss.
She's going to the pokey, man. Don't lie. Don't lie. That's why you should always be closing the door to the federal agents. I mean, this happened in a courtroom proceeding, and even to your point about the hammer in search of a nail, the reason that the PETA types or any other like eco group gets targeted is because you're presumed guilty until they can definitively say you're innocent. And you have taken that first step because you've created an organization, which, I mean, that's great because no matter what happens, then they can always say it was a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were more than one people involved. You've done half of the lift for them as it comes to meeting the requirements of a statute to convict you for a crime. Let's talk about some of the good ones that are possibly coming out from the DOJ. I mean, and as an addendum to the story, Tonka is now safe. She lives with Save the Chimp Sanctuary. So rest easy, any of the PETA members that are trolling around in the AMRAD pod chat. But let's talk about Luigi Mangione.
Luigi
Is a hero, a champion, a vox populi for the communist left because a super rich kid shot a richer guy in broad daylight out on a city street in New York City, and somehow that represents the downtrodden man. Well, it's elevated conversations about I don't know, health insurance. So federal prosecutors to seek death penalty for Luigi Mangione in the United Healthcare CEO's killing. He's 26 years old, Ivy League graduate, so I think they call that privileged, from a prominent Maryland real estate family, facing separate federal state murder charges after he gunned down this guy Thompson, who was United Healthcare CEO. The killing and ensuing 5-day manhunt led to Mangione's arrest, rattled the business community, with some health insurers hastily switching to remote work or online shareholder meetings. It also galvanized health insurance critics, some of whom have rallied around Mangione as a stand-in for frustrations over coverage denials and hefty medical bills. And that's where I want to go to the insanity, because you choose this guy. This is your champion.
Yeah, this is your mascot. I'm good with this death penalty, seeking the death penalty here. You don't get to murder somebody in cold blood regardless of your gripe with them. Plain and simple. And this has been natural law for eternity, for all of humankind, all of human history, since Cain and Abel, since the very first murder. You owe a blood debt. Yes, God just gave Cain a mark, but Cain pleaded and then received grace because he said, "I'm going to be killed if I'm just set loose." And for the rest of human history, you kill somebody, you most likely are going to get killed in return. So I'm good with this. And for these companies who are propping him up as some sort of hero, this is part of that slippery slope, part of that cold civil war. Do I think we have insurance figured out here? Absolutely not. And it's only gotten worse since the Obamacare and the atrocious Supreme Court ruling there. But here we are. This is where we are, and it's that brewing, that pot of civil war that's just starting to boil. And there's so many different facets of it. This is just another piece.
Now, you've got a death penalty case for Mangione, and it looks like we're going to have up to a 20-year sentence for a Colorado man accused of a Tesla arson, as these have just continued around and around. And I mean, this is, again, it's always language. Speech is violence and violence is speech. It's just things. I'm sorry. You can't just burn people's property down because you want to make a political statement. Particularly, I think if as long as we're gonna have I don't know, a parallel comparison to what the Mangione murder, well, that sparked a larger debate. So it's actually a good thing, right, Garrett? This is going to spark a larger debate, I think, and justifiably so, and rightfully so, about the fact that for the last 4 years, maybe even beyond that, but very, very prominently in the last 4 years during the Biden administration, under the Merrick Garland at the head of the DOJ, we investigated people for ideology, not action. We tried to get them to agree to do action so that we could justify putting them in jail. But now, when there actually is action on the table and it's presented, and we know that the motivations behind that were an ideology to drive fear into people, to bring about political change that actually meets the statutes of domestic terrorism, this is what you have a federal law enforcement apparatus to, because you don't do pre-crime. I mean, you're right of boom in the criminal space, right? The idea of being left to boom is pre-crime. You're going to stop the attack from happening, but you can't have that without a level of despotism that correlates it again to the Kamala Harris Venn diagram. It's a complete circle with tyranny. So we don't want to have tyranny. So there is inherent risk. And that means that violent actions are going to take place. If we want to actually have a statute in place that says domestic terrorism, which means that violent action that is driven and motivated by an ideology to instill fear in people and bring about a political change. And we come to an agreement as part of the social compact that, yes, that is effective. We want that on the books. It has to be enforced. And that's what the DOJ is doing now, where we're going to investigate violent action as opposed to just ideology. So I have zero problem, all that to say, with 20-year prison sentences for people burning Teslas, because the people doing it are not just petty vandals. They're doing it because they want to instill fear in people.
100%. These are politically motivated attacks that are trying to get someone. I'm sure ideally for them, it's Elon Musk. They want to get him to stop doing what he's doing or
He
to
lives
flip.
rent free in more people's heads than he should.
I've been seeing all sorts of clips lately of unhinged, and most of them are boomers too, which is very bizarre to me. But unhinged liberal boomers going and sliding by a Cybertruck or a Tesla and keying it, failing to realize that they're being recorded by that very vehicle. And then in some of the cases, they've already been tracked down. And some of them, it was the internet who helped find the guy. And then the police get involved.
Imagine thinking in that scenario that you're the good guy.
Exactly
Like,
right.
and even if you do think you're the good guy, you think that keying that car is an objectively progressive thing as far as achieving the goal. Like if you really deluded yourself that much. I mean, I guess I'm trying to make sense of insanity, so it's kind of a futile effort here.
Right.
But if you thought, look, I'm down for the fight. I'm bringing about communists. I read Animal Farm, and the pigs are the good guys. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to key a car.
Yeah. That's my end state because I'm so mad at Elon Musk. And then too, I've been seeing these pictures of people putting placards or, an 8x10 piece of paper that they put some sort of plea on
Like
or
the BLM riots,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's like, don't destroy my Tesla because I'm with you.
It's a communist going after communists, which very much like when they had the riots going on the college campuses, I said, let the communists tear down the communist ivory towers. Just stand back. That's a very Sun Tzu thing. When the enemy is destroying himself, you stand back and let it happen.
Mhm.
All right. Now, big ag is the next topic because this would be insane if they brought about. I'm hoping that maybe RFK at the helm here is going to stop it from happening because big ag wants the same immunity as vaccine companies.
Uh-oh. That sounds not good.
Bayer and
Why would they want
Monsanto,
that, Steve?
Bayer and Monsanto just hired 20 lobbyists to convince your senators and congressmen that they should enjoy complete immunity from lawsuits, just like the vaccine companies. The play for profit is even worse for us and better for them than the deal the vaccine manufacturers got. Okay. So the vaccine immunity is part of this bill, the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, passed during the Ronald Reagan administration. Vaccine companies were required to pay 75 cents per vaccine into a special injury fund. And then they have like this extrajudicial court. So if you're injured, the court will determine if you're vaccine injured and they can award you from that pool of money, the 75 cents per jab, you can get a payout. So some modicum of justice. Okay. And the proposed bills for the big ag don't even propose a fund, a court, or an accountability whatsoever. So they can just sell you lots of red dye and I don't know, hard metals in your baby formula, and there's no recourse at all.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where you hear the headline and hopefully you immediately start to question what the underlying reasons for this are. Why would agriculture companies need to have legal protections like a pharmaceutical company? And man, Steve, both of these are immense rabbit holes. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have gone down at least the vaccine rabbit hole, but ag is just as bad. Steve, if we wouldn't have burned our bridges with Julie Kelly, we could have her on and have her stump for Monsanto.
Well, instead, we should just throw back up the underwriting sponsor of True
Yes, there we
Earth
go.
Pharmacy, trueearth.co, promo code AMRAD25, get you 10% off there.
You don't need big egg, Steve. You need True Earth egg. And honestly, yeah, sure, that's a plug, but at the same time, look at the major differences. Instead of spraying your crops with God knows what chemicals and man-made and look, I understand that we should do we must do what we can to ensure that our crops are plentiful and bountiful. But where's that balance? True Earth will help you do that. I don't know if they could scale up production to a degree of like a Monsanto or a Bayer, but wouldn't that be a blessing to mankind to have products like that instead of these chemicals that are getting sprayed on everything? And I think of my church. So my pastor, his brother was a missionary in Zimbabwe for I think around like 20 years. And him and his wife are retiring, or there's been a shift a little bit in their ministry. I don't really know all the details, but his brother is here now and visiting. And we had a thing at church last night for the kids, and he spoke a little bit, and he talked about how last year there was no crop for anybody because there was no rain. And it's like, dang, dude, like I don't even think about that. Tangentially, we know that that sort of thing happens still, even in the modern era, in some of these third world countries. And America, we send money, and then there's all sorts of nonprofits who allegedly are supposed to help with this sort of thing. But it really made me think, like, man, we have got it so good here. But again, for me, I just think of that balance, and I think of, okay, you're a big A company and you're seeking government protection, which makes me immediately question what you are doing. Because if you are truly acting in a benevolent fashion, and I understand you're trying to make a profit too, but you can still do that in a benevolent way. But when you seek that government protection, it makes me immediately think that you're being malevolent instead of benevolent.
All right. Now, you and I think we both sort of feel like we got off the last helicopter out of Hanoi when it became to the dating scene. Like, I never had to engage in the swipe right culture and
Nope.
online dating. I don't have a profile. Just met the old fashioned way, like face to face. All right.
Hmm.
Uh, so maybe we're a little out of our depth on this one, but I'd like to speak to the people who are unlucky in love and they're looking for others, and maybe where they can have some level of inspiration. And of course, I'm speaking of the T4T community, which
I don't know what
stands
that is.
for trans for trans.
Oh boy. Here we go.
The subject of our next insanity. Despite its fluctuations from person to person, gender dysphoria is a common experience.
No, it's not. Okay. It's just not.
It's becoming more and more common. And I think at the rates that I've run the math on, it will be 100% by the time that the generation after next is running things. And I love the fact that that is generation beta. Okay. It's a unifying thread for people, unless you listen to the American Radicals podcast. Uh, but it's for people within the community, the LGBTQ T4T Rainbow Kamikaze community, for trans men, which is women who want beards.
Okay.
This can be exacerbated by the way they look, such as having breasts or other feminine features. So they have to chop them off.
Mm.
So for the Rainbow Kamikaze people, shared experiences are what unites us. For trans people specifically, there can be a sense that a shared experience is essential when it comes to feeling safe and confident when dating. Commonly known as T4T, this shorthand phrase for trans, is a signal from one trans person outwardly to the world, often on dating apps, that they desire another trans person romantically, sexually, or just for a platonic friendship. Aside from sharing their lived experience, couples where both people are trans can offer affirmation and validation, because that's what it's all about, because they are the most inward looking people who are out there, right? I
Hmm.
just need you to validate me. And
Hmm.
I've been looking off screen to spare you, which I shall do no longer, Garrett. Look at that.
Oh boy.
Loving couple of the T4Ts, both women who injected themselves with enough testosterone to grow beards that are of equal level to my own, and I am clean shaven.
Oh man, this is if you're not watching, this is a very, very bizarre and immediately uh just it just strikes you as wrong, and because you can see it in their jawline. But then there's the beard. You can see it kind of in their cheekbones. And so okay, I'm gonna
All right,
try to.
you're an insane person.
I must
And
be.
if you come to the conclusion, and look, I haven't walked a mile in their pumps or whatever they wear, okay? Um, But if you realize that you have certain natural attractions and you are a deviant, if you're thinking, hey, look, I am a woman and I am attracted to other women who want to be men, and I myself am a woman who wants to be a man. Like, that is such an infinitesimally small number of people. The fact that it got written about in a mainstream legacy news is insane.
Mm-hmm.
And we deserve whatever we get for it,
Fire
which
and
is
brimstone is what's coming for it. But this is what I'm trying to parse through in my head. Are you actually a woman who wants to be a man, or are you just a woman who's attracted to a man? Because
it would seem simpler if you would just find I don't know, a more effeminate man. They are out there,
yeah,
right?
I don't know how it works when it's a woman who wants to be a man. As far as the surgeries go, like I understand getting like the mastectomy, which is absolutely insane. But what about the other essential piece? Because I've heard of stories of men getting the old dingleberries snipped off and morphed and transformed into the other thing. But when it comes to women, how do they make a phallus for them?
They take a big chunk of skin from their forearm.
Ugh. And
Yeah.
okay, how do you w- what happens for coitus, Steve? How does that work then?
I am not well versed enough. I'm not a medical professional, Garrett.
Because
I'm
I
just
don't think I don't think your some flesh from your forearm is going to be able to get the proper blood flow that is needed in a romantic scenario. So what exactly? I
those are just freaks that we just used to like put in colonies and just forget about them, right?
hmm
All right. Along those lines, I have a great contrast: insanity and insanity all manifesting in themselves, and it always starts overseas and it comes over here. So we're seeing the downstream consequences with the chicks who feel gruff here, but it is starting in the UK, where we see both of them combined, and the unstoppable force meets the immovable object because a toddler just got kicked out of nursery for being transphobic. Whoever this toddler's parents are awesome.
I gotta ask, and I gotta throw a shout out to that Jen Chang in the chat, because did this toddler reference a non-functional meat log, and then that made him transphobic?
They don't give you the specifics because of personal privacy, I guess. I don't know. But the toddler kicked out of a nursery after being accused of being transphobic or homophobic. It could have been one or the other. Might have just been a kid that lives in a house that says gay and retarded. The child was reportedly aged either 3 or 4 and had been suspended during the academic year. Spokesman for the Department of Education told the newspaper, which is the Express, quote, all pupils and staff should feel safe and protected at school and should never face violence or abuse.
Okay, I
Our
don't think
plan,
they know what words mean, because
get your kids out of that school because
yeah,
the staff felt threatened by the 3-year-old saying you're gay.
dude, dude. I mean, what? I, I'm at a loss for words here, Steve. I guess what comes to mind initially is the cycle. The hard times create hard men create good times create weak men create bad times. We're right at the turn point of the bad times, because how can a society exist when you are this weak and when you are this obsessed with things that aren't even real? Because your violence and abuse that you're talking about from a freaking toddler is what scared you, the staff?
I mean, that's along the lines of we had the kid here who was disciplined, suspended for the Pop Tart gun. I don't know if you remember that one, where he had a Pop Tart and he chewed it into
Yeah,
like an L shape and was
like
going like making pew
yes,
pew pew sounds. And the
like
school had
every
a
child has
zero
done.
tolerance policy for firearms.
Yeah, I'm gonna shoot the cinnamon inside at you, or blueberry, maybe. I don't know.
All right, we got to wrap up here with a couple more about insanity. And Zero Hedge had this one. This is the Tyler Durden, so got to make sure I give a shout out. And it comes from the state of Maryland, which we referenced earlier. They're passing a sleep tax, as
Hmm.
it's been called here, because they're very sane. They have all their common sense. Small, vocal group of conservative Republicans in the Maryland House of Delegates were stunned when the far left Democrats pushed through House Bill 858, a bill that establishes a mattress stewardship program. It's basically a 6% extra sales tax on mattresses, which means that mattress stores in West Virginia and Delaware are just kind of like licking their chops because
Yes.
that's what happens, right? They're raising money by sending people out of state. So good on them. And then I do have a video as well, because it's on the subject of laws passing. I guess this law in Maryland would be okay because it's passed after 1965, whereas there was a visitor on The View who wants all laws pre-1965, which would include the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the 13th Amendment.
Thanks, Rosa Parks, but no thanks.
He's opposing the removal of slavery from the continent.
Okay.
One of the laws you write about is playing out right now, the Immigration and Nationality Act. Now, this administration is using this statute to justify the detentions and possible deportations, actually, of visa and green card holders who they seem to deem a threat to U.S. foreign policy. What do you make of the administration's use of the act? And more broadly, is Trump really setting up a First Amendment showdown, which is what Whoopi's been talking about?
Yes, absolutely. One of my premises for the book is that every law passed before the 1965 Voting Rights Act should be presumptively unconstitutional, right? But because before the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we were functionally an apartheid country. Not everybody who lived here could vote here. So why should I give about some law that some old white man passed in the
Okay.
Interesting logic here, Steve.
And also interesting wardrobe, because I mean, his neck is gigantic because he's so morbidly obese, but he buttons the top button without a tie. So I don't know if you should take any of that seriously, just based on his poor choice of clothing.
His
and
hair.
apparel.
The guy's a caricature of what he thinks. He's okay. He wants to cancel the Civil Rights Act of 1960 of the Civil Rights. He wants to cancel the Civil Rights Movement.
He's on The View, which is a show for the worst people on earth, like the liberal white women in the country who want to chop the genitals off their kids, who impress their kids at brunch, and that includes suffrage for women.
Right. Get rid of all of it, Steve. And then on top of it, he's essentially a caricature of what a 1960s era civil rights activist looked like. He's got the poof hair, comb back, as if he's a Malcolm X proselyte, but then he wants to cancel all those things. Very strange logic from that man.
All right, so that's going to sum up the temporary insanity discussion, but we're, as always, going to try to fill up our cup back with Garrett, and then we'll leave you also with a palate cleanse about the best moments of karma.
Here we go, Steve. We're still in Proverbs 14. Very simple, but I think we're going to hover in this area for a little while. Proverbs 14, verse 34, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people.
Because we have cut off all of God's commandments and his word regarding what righteousness and justice even is. And it's just in this white noise of the culture saying, sure, righteousness is good, but what is a version of righteousness for you may be different from me. We don't really know. Has God spoken? Does God say something? And again, the second thing is that we tend to think today that God isn't concerned with his standards being obeyed by those who don't know him. But back to the law of God, Matthew 5:17 through 19 is Jesus' statement on the law of God. Does the Lord Jesus, God incarnate, God among us, God with us, does he believe that under the new covenant the law is irrelevant? Jesus says in Matthew 5:17 through 19, do not even begin to think. Me namasete, don't think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Couldn't be clearer by Jesus. Jesus, are you coming to do away with the law? Are you going to undo it and abolish it? Is it gone? Do not even let it into your mind. Don't entertain the thought. Don't even start thinking that I've come to abolish it. I have not come to abolish it, but to fulfill it. And Christians today, right, we look at that and we tend to read it like this. Jesus, right, he says there he didn't come to abolish the law, but he came to abolish it. Right? That's how we tend to think about it. He didn't come to abolish the law. He just completely removes it and all of its requirements. So he came to abolish the law. Jesus says, if anyone teaches anyone to disobey even the least of these commandments, you will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But he says, whoever does them and teaches them shall be called great. So what is Jesus' perspective of the law of God, God's standards of righteousness and justice and uprightness? He says, do them and teach them.
Do them and teach them. And I think the common thread, even through all of the topics we covered today, is it boils down to that righteousness standard, where most people in society, regardless of what they espouse to believe, they don't know what righteousness is, as he's talking about there, as he's explaining there. It's rooted in God's law. And so when a society starts to come so far off the rails, it's because they are continuing to be removed and removed and removed and removed from what a righteous standard is in God's eyes. And that's why you have two women who think they're men, who think they're gay men or something like that. And even for a lay person, even for an atheist or an agnostic, most people would say, wait a second, help me parse this through because I don't understand what's going on here. Or the circular reasoning about getting rid of the Civil Rights Act because it came from white men. We can truly understand a righteous standard if we go back to the basics of God's word and understand why Jesus came and why he lived and why he died. It's because we are unrighteous and we strive to live righteously and to uphold God's righteousness. And when a society continues to slip and slip and slip further away from that, it becomes laying bare of where we have gone wrong and how and why we are unrighteous.
And with that really well constructed biblical worldview, let's talk about karma. It's an appropriate way to send you off on the American Radicals podcast.
Fuck you, dog. You're the one swerving. I was just following you. I'm the one swerving? Oh, I'm the one. Yeah, it was actually. Oh, there she and okay.
Got her.
Do not try to body slam your wrestling coach. He's
Nope.
ready at all times. He's in condition yellow. All right. That's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. As always, thank you for joining us, guys. Reminder, do smash the thumbs up if you haven't already and follow the program. And we'll be back with you Saturday, 10:30 here on Rumble. And until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.